Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is our regular webinar series that we host here at CARICAD. And we are absolutely delighted that you are able to join us today. Well over 200 of you have registered. Many are here live, and some will be joining us via YouTube, and some will be watching the recording later on. It is always my pleasure to serve and to share ideas. I am Dr. Lois Parkes. I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, popularly known as CARICAD. And in case you do not know the history of CARICAD, we are an arm of CARICOM. We have been in existence over 40 years, and we exist to support 17 member states in the area of administrative reform, public sector transformation. And we do that via a number of services that we will share with you a little later on. But in case you are new to our webinars, we always want to remind you and to inform those who are coming for the very first time of the tips that we adhere to so that we can have the best possible learning experience in this webinar space. And so we want to remove our distractions. Close other software applications on your device apart from Zoom. Mute your phones, or if you can't mute your phone, you can turn the ringer down. And our colleagues, we love them, we need to work with them, but you want to remind them that this is a little learning time for you, and hopefully for them, if they can join in. And so they just allow you this hour to just lean in and to learn all you can. And of course, if you have an internet cable, it's always good to plug that in to keep up the strength of your bandwidth. If you want to use your microphone, now in a webinar, you really don't have to use your microphone, but if you want to, then you want to ensure that that's working, your headset is working. And so I know from the participants list, many of you have participated in our webinars before. And so we always, and some of you know the routine, yes. And so many of you have already started not only to say good morning, but to say where they're joining us from today. And so I want to give an opportunity to others, if you haven't done so as yet, if you would type in the chat for us where you're joining us from today. So I see Tyra is joining us from the BVI, Renee also from the BVI, Mark Noel from the BVI, Ruth Thomas from Jamaica, right? Shavoy from BVI, Lloyd Walters, I know, my namesake, joining us from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service in Jamaica. Lavon, I see your good morning. Yes, let me see who else is joining us here. Grayson Biggs. Hi, Grayson from Jamaica, Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Jemmy or Jemai from BVI. Kishan, one of our esteemed alumni from our leadership program, joining us from BVI. Lauren from BVI. Esther, another of our esteemed alumni, joining us from Trinidad. Suzette from Trinidad, Davine from BVI, Adila from BVI. Whoa, BVI. National Works Agent in Jamaica, Orlan, welcome. Siobhan from BVI, Tyrone from Grenada, Jennifer Robinson from BVI. And also, if by any chance today is your first webinar, please also let us know. I see Cheryl from Trinidad, Vicky from BVI. Hi, Vicky. Yolande from Companies Office of Jamaica. Yes, Yolande did our Leading Change workshop. Oreen from MIIC Jamaica. Jennifer's your first. Big welcome to you, my dear Jennifer. Jafia from BVI, Danielle from Grenada, also her first webinar. Oh, where have you been? Faye from our esteemed alumni from Barbados, Faye Prescott. Welcome, Faye Oral from Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, Jamaica. Sonia from Ministry of Tourism, Jamaica. Keisha, first time for you, welcome. Pauline Stewart from Ministry of National Security. Tyra's your first time. Tyrone, first time. Tashari, first time. Mark Noel, first time. Lord, I am pleased. I am pleased. I see Gatry, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Gatry, from Trinidad, first time. Cleverne, BVI, first time. Erica Miller from the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Rowan Reed from Mocha, Jamaica. Oh, really, really great to see all of you. Danisha Cellular, first time. Tasha from BVI. Dr. Connie George, my esteemed colleague from BVI, who is in charge of learning and development for the government of BVI. Connie, welcome, welcome, special welcome to you. And so I know if we were to tally up all of the experience that we have here in this webinar space, it would go into the hundreds of years. So I say that to say that I am not coming to you today as the fount of all knowledge. I'm just sharing some ideas, some tips from research, from experience, not only mine, but the experience of our alumni as we have worked on this particular topic. And I want us to really share and to be open about your experiences, your successes, your challenges. What are the questions? And in particular, we want to hear how else might CARICAD support you in this particular area of improving public policy and performance planning? That is an all-important function, if not the central function of our public services. So many of you are here, right? Like I said, over 200 persons registered for this webinar. I see over 100 participants actually here live. So I know nobody put a gun to your head. So I am curious to hear, what are you most curious about? What is it that prompted you to register for this webinar? When you saw the topic, you saw the explainer for the webinar, what the webinar was all about. What is it about this particular topic that you're curious about? What is keeping you up at night when it comes to this topic? To give you a moment to think, and you can type your response in the chat. So Dr. Arlene Penn, welcome. She is curious about the theory of change. And it's funny we say the theory, because the truth of the matter is the theory of change is a broad concept, but really there are, within that broader concept, many different theories of change that exist. And these are some of them are more general, some of them are specific to a particular field or sector. Hello, Jacqueline from Trinidad, welcome. My namesake, Lois Walters, wants my perspective on the issue. Okay, Madam HR Policy Leader. So, Law, you know, I'll be quick to call on you, right? So, bear yourself. Anybody else? What are you curious about? So, Gatry says, we need practical steps to stimulate and manage changes to achieve a healthy and productive workplace culture. Okay, all right. Thanks for that, Gatry. No, that's not exactly the topic that we're covering here today, Gatry. But there are some linkages with that, which I'll talk about later. Sonia wants any new concepts, any new ways of doing things. All right. Thanks for that, Sonia. Grace and Biggs Allen is curious about program design, outcomes, map implementation, monitoring, and data collection. All right. Grace Ann, thank you for that. And what I'm going to ask, with me in the background is my colleague, Roger Seeley. He's our virtual producer. And so, Roger, I want you to actually, capture these comments Because as you can imagine, our webinar today is rather short. My presentation should be no more than 30 minutes. And so what I want us to capture, we will be capturing is what are some of the things that you're interested in so that it can inform future webinars or interventions that we can undertake. And what I'm doing today is simply high-level introductory. Want to welcome those who are logging in just now. Welcome. We're still in the early phases of our webinar and just going through this question. So many of you registered. Thank you so much. So many of you are here and we're asking, what are you most curious about? Why did you decide to spend your morning with us to discuss this topic? So Daniel, hi Daniel, welcome. Daniel has been a facilitator of webinars in the past, and he's here today. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel wants to know more about contemporary ways in public policy and performance planning. Kilva is interested in knowing more about the theory of change. Lavan, monitoring and evaluation. Ophelia, thoughts. Are there changes taking place around us? I'm curious to know what are the new concepts and perspectives. Renee, in a world clamoring for substantial change, where every decision shapes the future, understand and implement the theory of change in public policy. Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much. Orlan is interested in the application of theory of change in project design and evaluation for public investment management. That's an interesting one, Orlan, because you're right. We can't just be implementing projects without understanding what is the impact that we can reasonably expect to have happen, to occur. And so what is the theory of change that is implicit and embedded and really driving the design of a project? Atlee, welcome, Atlee. Atlee, I always love to pick up Atlee, my coachee from Antigua, Commissioner of Police. Welcome. He is interested in navigating the process of constant change in my area of work. Oh, yes. Agnes, welcome. I know Agnes has done at least one of our programs before, joining us from BVI. Welcome to those who are just joining. I just saw Ajodia from Trinidad, aka Bobby. Welcome. Welcome. And before I start to dive deeper into the topic, I am just throwing out this question there to you all. What are you most curious about as it relates to this topic? Welcome, Michelle from Trinidad. Michelle is a regular participant in our webinars, and we so appreciate that. All of you who regularly come, but I also, again, want to welcome those who are joining for the first time. And so I see BVI, Inland Revenue Department. Oh, a whole posse is here from the Inland Revenue Department of BVI. And so in attendance is Mrs. Ermin Turnbull, Assistant Commissioner, Ashmore Romney, Senior Collections Officer, Jeanette McMaster, Systems Administrator, Emily Daniel Brown, Assistant Collection Officer, and Candia Hodge, Records Officer. And they say they're happy to be here, and we are absolutely happy to have you all here. All right. Well, let me get into it. Hello, Jade, joining from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government in Trinidad. All right. So, I want to just share a little bit more, particularly for the benefit of those who are here for the first time, a little bit more about the kinds of technical assistance and services that we provide here at CARICAD. We support our member states in the area of public sector transformation, and our technical assistance covers these areas that you see listed here: governance and policy development, leadership development, human resource management and development, organizational development and design, public financial management support, strategic planning, results-based management, monitoring and evaluation, change management, supporting digital government transformation, business process analyses, capacity building, contingency, and business continuity planning. And all our work is driven by the Charter for Public Services. And this is a common conceptual framework that we have developed for guiding public sector transformation work. And you will see here that this is really rests on 6 pillars: governance, standards, capacity, accountability, openness, and legislation. If you want to learn more about our work, please do visit our website at caricad.net. So let me dive right into the topic here. And I saw from all of your comments, you have such a broad range of interest in this area. So, like I said, what I'm presenting is introductory, creating some broad understanding around the theory of change and how we use that to improve public policy and performance planning. And as we are rolling out webinars for the rest of the year, we are going to be sharing a number of other tools that we have developed here at CARICAD that will, in fact, help you in this process of public policy, program implementation, transformation, and performance planning. So, this is our topic. And before we get into the theory of change, maybe we have to step back and really let us ensure that we have a common understanding of what is public policy. And to put it in very simple terms, public policy is government action. It's government action. It is the course of action that's either created or enacted, typically by government, in response to public real-world problems. Problems such as youth unemployment, problems such as crime and security issues, problems such as non-communicable diseases, problems such as food security, climate change, housing, especially for the less fortunate and the most vulnerable. You name it, the list goes on, right? And so when we are talking about public policy making, this is a definition that was found in the source that you see there. It's the process by which governments translate their political vision into programs and actions to deliver outcomes, which are really desired changes in the real world. All right. We all here, based on where you said you're joining from, we are from the Caribbean region. We are from countries that use a democratic system of government. Okay. And we know each political party and the policymakers are the politicians who have been elected to govern for a particular political term. They all have a political vision. So they will call it a manifesto, right? A set of programs and policies, promises that really combine together is really that particular party's political vision. And once in power, they seek to translate those things into programs and actions to make those promises hopefully a reality and to create a desired change and an impact for the citizens of that country and other stakeholders. Implementation and delivery. So there's a conceptualizing the development of the policy, and now the policy, of course, has to be implemented, has to be delivered. And this is about how we, and I think most of us here, are in either some government ministry, agency, department, organization. How does your department, your ministry, your organization align itself to achieve this overall strategic vision, this political vision, this strategic plan? Some places have national plans, national development plans, some don't, but there is some articulation of a political vision. And is how then do we align ourselves to enable and motivate the whole delivery system to achieve the outcomes described in the vision? In short, we have to help to make it happen. And we don't necessarily do so just in our little department or our little team, but it is in fact a whole delivery system involving multiple stakeholders, multiple arms of government that have to coordinate and work together in order to deliver and achieve the outcomes as articulated. So I want you to share with me in the chat, what are some examples of the public policies and programs that you are working in or working with, you are implementing, and what are the changes they are expected to bring about? And I want you to also think a little further. How well are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, in terms of bringing about those expected changes? Have a think about it, yeah? Hello, Maria, welcome. And I also see Eva joining from, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, joining from Her Majesty's Prison in the BVI. Welcome. Welcome also to Maria, one of our wonderful associate consultants here at CARICAD, who makes a point, multiple stakeholders working collaboratively. Daniel Armstrong, problem definition is always the hardest. Oh, so true. What is a problem we're actually trying to solve? Yes. What is the actual problem? Because if we haven't defined the problem correctly, then we'll go about implementing well-intentioned policies, but not actually addressing the actual problem, because the problem up front was not accurately or fully described and defined. Just waiting to see if there are any takers at all. So Lois said the COVID-19 guidelines, right? Yeah. And so I think almost all of us had to be developing or implementing COVID-19 guidelines, in response to the pandemic we all went through. Sonia says, community tourism policy bring structure guidance, especially to clusters. Oh, that's a good one, Sonia. Daniel talks about online learning in schools. Indeed. And online learning, the fact that we're all here tells you online learning is here to stay in some way, form, or shape at every level of the education system. Joyce Lane says the development of a social protection policy framework. That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah. Remote work policies. I'm seeing that. Jade says at the ministry, they're currently working on an M&E policy to support the utilization of M&E tools and practices to increase evidence-based decision-making across the public sector in Trinidad. All right, thank you. So, if you were to look at let me say the community tourism one. Many of our countries, if not all, have a tourism sector, right? It might vary in terms of size and what the extent to which that sector contributes to the larger economy, but we all have tourism sectors, right? And so community tourism might be something, I know that's something that not just Jamaica, but there are a couple other countries that I know are pursuing similar policies. And what are the changes they're expected to bring about? And I would think one of the changes expected to bring about is socioeconomic growth in communities, particularly rural communities, communities that normally do not benefit from the tourism activities, right? And so, how well are you doing with that? I'm almost pretty sure nobody's going to say they're a 10. You're maybe somewhere along the spectrum, right? Maybe you think you're just starting out as a 1. Maybe you think it's a 5. Whatever you give, I know that you're dealing with something that is very challenging. So other policies people are talking about, are mentioned here. Mark talks about unemployment policy. Nadira, there's a particular thing to encourage 60 hours of learning in the public sector to encourage professional development. I like that. Minister of Industry in Jamaica is looking at his fees and charges policy framework. In Grenada, Karina welcome Karina joined us from Grenada. Regularization of public officers, there's a huge thing going on, and you're now at a 6, all right? National Correctional Services policy in Jamaica, yes. Diversification policy, J, right? So, and the reason why I'm sure none of you will say that you're a 10. It is simply because all of the issues that you're dealing with are extremely complex. I found this infographic and I thought it was so telling, and part of the challenge that we face in public policy and managing our performance, whether it's at individual level, organizational level, whole of government level, is that a lot of times we oversimplify what it is that public policy is about and what public policy is trying to achieve, because a lot of times we think things happen like the second image you're seeing in the slide here. You put all these wonderful things in place. Let's have the right policy, and you just do these things, and you just implement them. You have your budget, and everything will just roll out in a straight line, and we will have the change that we want to see. Move from state A to state B. No, we can move from state A to state B, but it is complex. And how many of you can tell me in the chat, you can give me a thumbs up, that the first image is more what it feels like as you work in the area of public policy, right? It feels like you're going all kind of twists and turns, and sometimes you feel like you go forward and you move back and you twist and you turn, you come on again, you come on again, you come on. Oh, and hopefully finally you get to be. You start to see the impact, but it is not a straight linear line. This is complex work that we're engaged in. And it's very important. If you take away nothing else, I said the BVI Inland Revenue people giving me the thumbs up. Yes, indeed. If we take away nothing else from today's session, it is to know that you are not crazy. If you're finding this hard, you work in the area of public policy, whether at the development level or whether you are an implementing arm, it is hard. It is complex, right? And so systems thinking is actually going to be very important as we navigate this minefield of public policy. We are dealing and operating in complexity. And so what do we mean by complex systems? Complex systems are really wholes that are more than the sum of their parts. And the wholes whose behavior cannot be understood without looking at the individual components and how they interact. So if we think about community tourism, there are so many elements to that system that makes up the community tourism sector. You know, they are the communities themselves. And the communities are not one homogeneous type of community. Some communities are rural, maybe some of them are fishing villages. The people in those communities are different age groups, different socio-economic level, different levels of education. Different communities are going to offer different kinds of products and services. Different communities have different access to different things like the road network, maybe electricity, maybe water supply. Do they have hotels, accommodation there, any kind of accommodation for tourists, etc. And the list goes on, yes? And so when we talk about system thinking, we are talking about a way of making sense of the complexity of the world that we're operating in by looking at it in terms of wholes and relationships rather than splitting it down into parts. So it's understood there are many movers and shakers and many dimensions of the system. And each of those dimensions and stakeholders are not off by themselves, but they interact with each other. And it's understanding those interrelationships and interactions. And we use it as a way of exploring and developing effective action in complex contexts, enabling systems change. And so in our leadership programs, in particular our leading change as well as our transformation and leadership development program, we delve more into systems thinking and stakeholder mapping. And so the idea here is that we encourage systems thinking and the use of system thinking in public policy because it respects complexity. And that's one of the things I want to take away. You have to respect the complexity in which you are operating in. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. And what this means is that we have to accept that our understanding, you know, sometimes we sit as civil servants, I think most of us here are public servants. We kind of sit in our offices and think that we know everything about the system that we're trying to change, right? Our understanding is at best incomplete. And it means that when we experience a situation or issue as complex, we don't always know what is included in the issue and what's not, all right? And therefore, some work has to be done. And so this brings me then to this business of the theory of change. And what is exactly the theory of change? And broadly speaking, the theory of change is essentially a comprehensive description, right? And a lot of times that illustration, so you can draw maps and tables depicting this theory of change, right? But it's really a comprehensive description of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. Let me go through that again. It's a description of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. So let me go back to that community tourism example of a public policy that some people are working on. Embedded in that, whether it's implicit or explicit, by the way, is a theory that says, well, if we put in place these programs, these systems, these incentives, then it is going to have this change. It's going to have this outcome, this impact. And that second bullet I thought was very important because whether we explicitly unearth and describe our theory of change, ideally that's what we ought to do. But let's face it, I think all of us have seen where That's not always explicitly stated. We have not always benefited and utilized and done the hard work of analyzing why we do the things we do in public policy and development and implementation. But even if we don't explicitly express it and have it written down, documented, it is still there. It is implied. It is implicit. Indeed, this is not only true of public policy, it is true of just everything in life, right? For instance, people will make great sacrifices to send their children to a particular school because they have a theory of change that they're working with. If I give my child access to a certain type of education, they will have better outcomes as an adult. They'll be able to get a better job. They'll be hopefully better off than us, more financially stable. They could buy a house, a car, take care of their future families. That is the theory of change that just about every parent works with, okay? And so we have to understand that the policies that we are undertaking, they're seeking to tackle very significant social and structural challenges in our society. And therefore, we have to combine approaches that can act at different levels of society. This is where the complexity comes in, because a theory of change has to take into account that impact has to happen at different levels. So change has to happen at an individual level. When we teach change management in our leadership courses, one of the things we love to share, and it's not our quotation, but I love it, is that the unit of change is individual. Think about it. When our countries implemented legislation to make it mandatory for drivers to drive with their seatbelt on and for passengers to use the seatbelt in cars, change had to happen at an individual level. Each driver, each car user, car passenger, have to individually lock on, put on their seatbelt, right? And then it happens at a social level. If enough people are doing it, it starts happening in a community level, a social level, among family, among friends, around peers, around your community. Change also happens at a physical environment level, in your neighborhood, places like your schools, your workplaces, local facilities. And of course, there is what needs to happen at a macro level or sectoral environmental level. And this is where you talk about things like, the societal norms, the laws, the legislation, the government policies, the role of and impact of the media, things like transportation system that's happening, across sectors, just to give some examples. And so your theory of change may need to show how policies working at these levels could integrate towards achieving the desired outcomes. Think about it. And one of the common challenges I have seen over time in my own experiences, and I'm sure you can bear with me. So you are in your correctional services department trying to work on certain things, but you recognize that you need the input of other departments, other ministries, that other government policies have to work together with yours for it to really have the desired outcome. We see that with crime, right? And so crime cannot be fought. Atlee, I beg of you to chime in here. Crime cannot be fought only by the police. Not at all. The factors that lead to people getting into crime relate to so many other things, like the education system, like the public health system, right? If you think about it, many people get into crime because they may have learning challenges that have gone undiagnosed, and because of that, they get into patterns of behavior that are really then lead them into criminality, right? It's about the family structure. It's about other local facilities. What's the impact of things like, community groups like churches, etc. Many things have to come together for us to deal with crime adequately. Access to adequate housing, especially for the poor. All of these things come together. And so Atlee is agreeing with me, as well as Colleen. Well, many of you are agreeing with me. Atlee says it's a multi-approach involving many key players. Yes. So many times the crime has gone up and we're ready to kill the police. And we're ready to say, get rid of the commissioner of police, get rid of the minister of national security. But there are many things that go into the mix. And so this also is about what are we doing in terms of the whole of government approaches so that policies are in sync and operate collaboratively. Janice Shaw says, fighting criminality is the responsibility of everyone in society. Exactly. Exactly. And so what I have here is a depiction of a theory of change. This is really looking at some of the policies that we have now across the Caribbean. We've been developing them, trying to promulgate them. And it's really about healthy foods and looking at promoting the eating of, the selling of healthy foods. And we're seeing examples of things like, emphasis on the labeling so that people know, what is in their food so that they can make healthy food choices. You have seen policies around our school feeding programs and looking at what are we feeding our children in school and looking at the sugar content in drinks that people typically purchase. And this really is part of the thrust that many of our countries have to address the issue of non-communicable diseases. We have a high rate of non-communicable diseases, our number one killer. And so what you notice here is the depiction of what I just talked about. That so many things have to happen for this to work. For these policies to work, you have to have things that are happening at the individual level, the social environment level, the physical environment level, and at the macroeconomic environmental sectoral level. So you notice we have to think about what's happening in the home. How are we encouraging people in terms of the meals that they consume as families? Work sites, what's happening with access to healthy food options for people who are working? And similarly, what's happening in our schools, what's happening in our childcare facilities, what's happening in our restaurants and fast food outlets? How do we shift societal and cultural norms and values around food? What kind of policies can we put in place to incentivize the food and beverage industry to produce and to sell healthy food and beverage options, right? What are our food and agricultural policies to encourage the production of, say, vegetables to reduce import dependency and to increase local production and access to healthier food options, right? What needs to happen at the individual level? Does the average person know how to make healthy food choices? Do we do things to encourage healthier lifestyles? So we have Caribbean moves. And so many countries have tapped into this, and we've been encouraging a lot of group exercises, in various communities, at workplaces. And that's all about trying to encourage an adoption of healthy lifestyles at the individual level, right? And I'm just looking in the chat at some of the comments here. So Arlene says we have to consult and engage all possible stakeholders. Exactly. Jay says, I'm thinking about the ripple effect that one pebble can cause ripples that extend beyond and away from the one pebble. Exactly. Exactly. You know, how can we create policies that we can't necessarily change the whole system, but can you change one area and how can that then build to create that ripple effect? Mark Noel says healthy lifestyle is very costly. That's true, you know, Mark, as somebody endeavoring to do so, is true. However, you know what is also more true? The health costs, the cost of medical care when you do get sick, right? And so we do need to find the ways of making healthy lifestyle cheaper, but we also have to have the perspective that is it not worth investing in a healthy lifestyle, because the cost of being sick and dealing with those costs is far more, far more, you know. So what I have here, and some of you may be aware of it, also critical to and part of how we explain theories of change is through using logical models or logical frameworks. And this is an example, a template of a logical framework matrix, right? And so why am I sharing this? And not to worry, we are going to have our registrants get access to the slides for this. This is important, particularly for performance planning. And it is really saying, look, what is the goal that we're after? Whatever your program is, whether it's community tourism, whether it's online learning, any of the programs, whether it is encouraging flexible work arrangements, policies, what is the goal that you're after? That has to be defined. What's the outcome? What's the purpose? And it's important to therefore define. So therefore, what are the activities? You know, so what are the actual programs that we're actually designing and implementing? And what are the outputs of those activities? And how do those feed into the outcomes and the goals and the impact that we're after? And for each of these things, it's absolutely important to define what are your indicators. What are your indicators? How do you know that these activities have been completed and to what standard? And so at each step, you're going to need indicators. And you're going to have a means of verification. How do you know that you have actually done this thing, completed this thing, met this particular target, right? And why is this important? Somebody said earlier they were interested in how do we deal with, you know, motivating your team as you're trying to deal with all of these changes. Now, this is not a webinar on that topic, but I have found in my experience, part of the challenge that we have with engaging and motivating our teams as we want them to engage in implementing our policies and programs is this: we have not spent the time to engage our team. And I'm not just talking about the people who are the, you know, the more technical, the ones who have, you know, the earth degrees, etc. I mean, everybody. And everybody can contribute, and everybody should contribute, and everybody, in fact, needs to contribute. In understanding why do we do what we are doing? Why? Why are we talking about community tourism? Why? Why are we doing it? And by engaging people in this discussion, we get them to understand the why, and we get their input into what needs to be done. And this extends also, as was said in the chat, to having this engagement with our various stakeholders. So we can't talk about community tourism without engaging the people in said communities, right? And not after the fact, but being part of the design, the needs assessment, right? Because here is the thing, we need to know what are the activities that will actually give you the output, to give you the outcomes and the impact that you're after. How will we know that we have done these things and met these targets? You have to have your indicators. You have to have your means of verification. And so there has to be monitoring and evaluation. You have to track, and you have to have those mechanisms in place. And very importantly, we have to talk about our assumptions. What are the assumptions? What are the assumptions? So community tourism assumes that communities want to engage in community tourism. That's a heck of an assumption to make, because I put it to you that there are going to be some communities, they have the nice little river, and you think, oh, this will be a nice community tourism product. But the community said, no, we do not want all of these tourists up in here. They're coming to destroy our environment. They're coming to impede on our way of life. Suddenly, real estate prices going to go up, and we, the citizens, can't afford to live in our very communities. No, I don't want it. So, anybody can relate. So you need to have the assumptions, right? Yes, Lois said they want the river to use for drinking water. They want the river to wash their clothes. Yes. Right? And so we have to really ask ourselves, what are the assumptions? If we're going to engage in public education, and we said, okay, we're going to put things on the radio, and we're going to use, the various social media platforms. Ask yourself, the people who you need to target, do they use these platforms? Because the assumption is they use these platforms regularly and they will see it. Right? Is that, and sometimes going to be right, but we have to ask, what are the assumptions that we're making? What are the assumptions we're making? So, I'm going to use another example. People, they commit crimes, they are incarcerated, they serve a prison sentence. While they're incarcerated, lots of our prisons, I certainly know in Jamaica, I believe in almost all our prisons, we tend to involve the inmates in skills development, training. Somebody get the opportunity to go back to school, do CXCs, learn a trade. The assumption is once they have these skills and higher education, when they come out of prison, they can find meaningful work or engage in some kind of meaningful activity. And you reduce the rate of re-entry into prison. No, sometimes that works, but the assumption is that people will be willing to employ those people. People are willing to engage the services of a plumber who just come out of prison. Is that a correct assumption? I put it to you, it is not. And that therefore means if you want to reduce the rate of recidivism, Sherwin from Trinidad, you can tell me if I pronounce that correctly, right? Then we need something else. It's not just a training in the prison that's going to work. We need some kind of program where people have a pathway from prison to re-enter the broader society into the world of work and entrepreneurship. Hi, David. David is from Grenada. David said, unclear goals, lack of trusted data and evidence, and little or no consultation with relevant stakeholders will always affect the effectiveness of the implementation and impact of policies. So true. So clarity is so important. Clarity of goals, problem definition, clarity. Actually having data, good data, trustworthy data to inform the process. And so, as I wind down my presentation to allow for some discussions here or further discussions, just want to share a couple of approaches and tips that we might want to consider, right? And these really come in the form of questions for the most part. Ask yourself and your team, what will you be creating a theory of change for? All right, so you're defining the area of work. the area of public policy? Is it for a set of services? So the next example here, like early help or reducing parental conflict, yeah? Or is it a therapy for a specific approach or intervention for whatever part of public policy you work in? Who will be involved in developing your theory of change? And you want to think of and consider, many of our countries have codes of consultation for stakeholder engagement. Consider a mix of relevant stakeholders who will bring different perspectives, partners, senior leaders, managers, practitioners, you name it. What evidence will you bring to inform the process? And this is where the importance of data, monitoring and evaluation data, research studies, right? And this is where, this is a weak area in our government, and we need to collaborate with other partners, such as, you know, our universities, for example, to help us with this process. Here are some other questions. What is your approach is aiming to tackle? So problem definition is important. How does it add value above other approaches delivered previously or currently, right? Because remember, it's a theory of change. So why are we changing our approaches? You know, you have to know what's the change, what's the added value, as opposed to what we're doing now. Do we have evidence? And what is the evidence to support your assumptions, right? Who is the approach for? What is the level and nature of need for those the approach is intended for? So it's really about who is the target of these policies and programs, right? What is their need? What are their characteristics, right? So don't just say, oh, you know, people in inner city communities, rural women, you know, you want to really think, you know, who are they really? Break it down, right? One size doesn't fit all. And in fact, when you do that analysis, you might find that in fact there's some groups, you probably better to use one type of intervention, others another kind. Maybe some people need a greater spend and effort, as opposed to others who need to be served too, but basically don't have as great a need. Here's some other questions to contemplate. What outcomes are achieved by the approach or intervention? So what are the outcomes we intend to achieve? What are the key activities? And how do they link to the outcomes? Because a lot of times, this is where we get messed up and misaligned. We have a lot of activities, no linkage to outcomes. So you want to answer these questions. What are the key features? What do these features look like? How often and for how long do they support the target groups? So if you're having a program for people exiting the prison system, you want to know, you have to figure out how long will this program be. It can't be forever, but it can't be too short either. Who is delivering these activities? Is it government? Are you partnering with NGOs? You know, is it private sector? And how do you get the private sector involved? How are the target groups recruited? And how do they engage with these activities? And very important, what are their barriers, enablers, and unintended consequences? And this is where asking questions about your assumptions helps, because asking questions about what are the assumptions that we're making about everything right throughout, you know, it will also help you to identify what are some of your barriers, what are some of the enablers, what might be some unintended consequences. And last but not least, just some additional tips. So, they say if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. So let us be willing to review our current policies and programs and ask ourselves, is it really having the impact that we need to have? What are the assumptions we're making? How do we need to redesign this? Right? We want to engage in those conversations, not only with our internal teams, but with, it's always a multi-agency approach, a multi-agency conversation, multiple stakeholder conversations need to happen. We want to build capacity continuously. We can't have too much capacity in this area of public policy and performance planning, and the beauty about the world we live in today, there's so much that is available. in terms of webinars, online courses, research done by international development partners, even amongst ourselves here across CARICAD member states. We can help each other to build capacity, continue to emphasize research and to build that capacity, and network. That's what we're doing here today. Network. The chances are somebody has already done what you have done. Somebody else is experiencing the challenge you're having. And we can learn and support each other. And so that is my brief presentation. And I want to give you a little more time to just to ask any questions or continue to ask. Well, I didn't see many questions, I saw the comments, but you can keep the comments coming, as well as let us invite questions on the topic. And I see Sherwin saying the unintended outcomes are important as they are impacting on society. So true. And the truth of the matter, that's why monitoring and evaluation is so important. Because while we are conceptualizing the program or the policy, we can try to, predict possibilities in terms of unintended outcomes. And mark your unintended outcomes can be positive too, not only negative. But particularly the negative ones, we were very concerned about. We can't necessarily predict all of them up front. That's just the truth. And that's why it's important that we have a constant monitoring and evaluation of those mechanisms so that we are evaluating early to pick up what might be some negative unintended outcomes and to quickly review and course correct. And Sherwin continued to say, predict and attempt to mitigate. Thank you, Gatry, for your wonderful comments. Thank you so much. Now I see David has his hand up. David, you should be able to unmute.
Good morning.
Good morning, David.
How are you? Thank you for your presentation. Very timely, and it's an issue that we really have to deal with. And as you mentioned, capacity building is never too much. We need to continue doing that. But my main point now is regarding monitoring and evaluation. Most science persons think that monitoring and evaluation comes at the end of some things, or maybe a project or something like that. But I am advocating and also in asking persons to ensure that you should set out from the beginning that monitoring and evaluation should be very much part, because you must establish, first of all, what you want to evaluate, what you want to monitor, in order for you to properly get the goals, achieve your goals that you set out in the first case. Thank you.
No, lovely comment, pertinent comment. And monitoring evaluation cannot just come at the end. It has to be designed up front, and it has to happen right throughout the entire process. Monitoring evaluation is even, you need to evaluate even your design process. What is the effectiveness, the efficacy of, for instance, your initial, stakeholder consultations? How effective, how thorough was it? Thank you so much. And so Gatry, yes, all registrants will get a copy of the slide as well as a link to the recording. Now, Stephen has asked, can I speak to time factors and the impact on change? All right, so, Stephen, what I'm going to do here, your question is a little bit vague. So, I'm just here, there's so many registrants, which is awesome. All right, but just means that fine. Stephen, I wonder if you'd be brave enough. I'm giving you opportunity to unmute, and I wonder if you could just clarify your question.
Yes, as it relates to the whole theory of change and planning and implementing something that is going to have a community impact, I didn't hear you address the issue of time because some programs may require us to consider the urgency of a change factor, and some things may be drawn out, and the involvement of all the stakeholders can have an impact on the valuable information to make change a reality, or it can lead us into a situation where we're making changes, but we don't have the necessary buy-in to impact the various levels where change is going to occur. Does that help you to with what I'm asking?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just chuckling to myself because your question actually, what you said actually answers the question, you know, and I can just say, yes, you are quite correct. And that is why really having not only the data around the issue, you know, getting as much data as you can, but the engagement of the stakeholders. Because here's the truth, you know, it is never possible to serve everybody equally all at once. We don't have the resources to do that. And so the work of public policy will always involve some trade-offs. And part of making those trade-offs is from the analysis to determine what are the things that are absolutely urgent, or it might be you might be phrased it another way. You know, who needs to be prioritized? Who needs to be served first, as opposed to other stakeholders who simply do not have the same level of need, right? And it's also about the communication around it, because of course everybody wants to be served all at once. And so how do we communicate why it is that we have to sequence our service delivery in the way that we are doing it, right? So absolutely important. And it's only when we really and fully engage the stakeholders that we can, one, get the data that we need, but also understand how we need to engage the stakeholders in terms of getting their involvement in the process, their support for the process, but also to know how we rank state, you know, you rank who needs to be served first, second, third, etc. All right. Thank you for that. Now I see a number of questions coming in. Just give me a minute here just to get them through. How do you adjust a policy given by the government? It may be politically motivated, but it may not be feasible given the given time frame. Example, reduce youth crime in 3 months. Indeed, actually, because the reality is that one of the tensions of public policy is about the feasibility of time frames within which these outcomes can be achieved. And there's always going to be that tension between what the policymakers, the politicians, want to see happen, and oftentimes what us as civil servants, public officers, technocrats in these areas, how we understand, you know, the time frames within which certain things can happen. And here is a challenge for politicians. Let us not beat them up. The truth of the matter is they have a very defined political term, and if they don't get a good performance scorecard, they lose their jobs by way of being voted out. And so if you're going to be a politician worth your salt, you have to show that you have accomplished something, right? It just is so, right? Now, the thing that we have to balance, is a polarity that has to be managed, is how do we make reasonable progress, you know, while we understand that certain outcomes are going to happen over a longer term, right? So if we're talking about something like education reform, the benefit of education reform almost always is going to be seen in the next 20 years. Almost always. You know, educational outcomes do not change overnight. They don't change in a year, don't change in 3 months. And so, and part of it, can I tell you, is also the electorate, because we love the nice promises, but how many of the electorate really can understand and appreciate that while we want governments to give us results, do they understand the complexity of what helps to create those results? What's their role in creating those results? And can we have patience to understand that some things are short term, definitely, but some things are medium term, some things are very long term. Janice is, you know, she appreciates the discussion about a multi-sectoral approach because it helps in pooling resources for the greater good. Yes, you know. So David was asking if I could share a little bit more about assumptions, right? David and others, it is really about being very deliberate and intentional as we develop our activities. Many of you have work plans, you have strategic plans, and you're filled with all these activities and time frames, right? But ask yourself, what is the assumption underlying this activity? What has to be true for this activity to give us this output, or for this output to contribute to this outcome? All right. So online learning, Daniel had that as one of the things they're working on. One of the assumptions, as we put in smart boards and all kinds of learning platforms and virtual learning platforms, the assumption is that teachers are quite capable of navigating and teaching multiple students with their multiple needs via these kinds of platforms. That is an assumption. And I am pretty sure that Daniel does have responsibility for teacher training. Daniel, talk to me in the chat, right? But Daniel is doing this thing based on an assumption that these teachers are being properly trained to do these wonderful things that Daniel, and can maximize all of these wonderful things that Daniel and his team are working on. That's an assumption. No, is the assumption true? I don't know, but Daniel needs to ask that question, because then if that assumption is false, then there's another kind of intervention that is required in addition to what Daniel is already working on. All right. I'm just checking here. I see there are many comments in the chat here, very, very useful. So Sonia talked about monitoring evaluation is now meal. Yes, new acronym. So they've added accountability and learning element, which I think is it's absolutely important, because we're not just monitoring and evaluating. You want to be very clear about who is accountable. That's where the performance planning aspect comes into play. So it's very clear who needs to do what, right? And as we are monitoring and evaluating, it is what are we learning and how we are using that learning to further improve and refine the policies and the programs, right? Now, I believe it is almost time for us to be done. We just have about 2 minutes left. And so I want to really just thank you for your questions. Roger is going to be capturing all that you have said in the chat. You will get the handout, the slides, you will get a link to the recording. And indeed, visit our YouTube channel to visit it to see our past recordings. They are very useful resource materials for you. And so Roger is going to put up momentarily in the chat the link to our webinar evaluation, and we're going to encourage you to fill that out for us, and just to keep you abreast of some of the things that are coming up we are working at CARICAD on our explainer series. So you want to look out for that. We at CARICAD have spent a lot of time and effort developing a lot of tools to help you in the policy planning, implementation, transformation, change processes. And so we are going to be rolling them out to let you know more about them, explain why we developed those, how you can access, how you can use them with great effect. Continue to look out for our advertisements for our webinars that are coming up. We have one next May as well as June and July. And in May, we are going to be launching our call for applications for our mid-level leadership development program, one of our flagship programs, and we're, you know, for, as the name suggests, targeted at mid-level leaders. And this is a program that has been going now for quite a few years with, you know, people have been very, very satisfied. Many of our participants have moved on to get, you know, onto promotional opportunities. Many of the leadership, the improvement projects that people worked on have actually been implemented in respective governments and organizations. It's a truly impactful program. And this time around and going forward, when you do this program, it will count as continuous professional development points that you will earn as well, and that will be reflected in the final certificate. And so the cost for the mid-level leadership development program is $2,000 US. And that's actually subsidized, by the way, and it runs for 3 months. And in addition to the learning sessions, you also get the opportunity to undertake an emotional intelligence assessment, and you will have an assigned coach who will help you to understand your scores and how you can develop a personal leadership development plan that you can work on throughout the program. So look out for those advertisements. And so with that, Roger, let me see if you're, yes, the link is in the chat for the SurveyMonkey link to complete the evaluation. So with that, it just leaves for me to say thank you so much for registering, for being here, for your questions, for your participation. I'm so sorry if some of your questions we didn't get to cover, but please email us at info@caricad.net. That's info@caricad.net. With any questions you have following up. If you want any further information about our services or training, etc., the email address is there in the chat as well. So thank you all very much, and I wish you the very best until we meet next month for our next impactful webinar. Thank you.